Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Sobel Bunis, and it's really my great pleasure to welcome all of you to my very first Facebook Live conversation. Now, I'm very excited today. Our topic is healthy, happy relationships and the holiday season, and we're going to get into it deeply today. Now, one of the great joys of my holistic family practice over the last 34 years is that I have met and collaborated with some amazing practitioners. And one of them is joining us today. Her name is Beth McDonald. I'm here in California, she's in Hawaii, and we're going to have this fabulous conversation about how to have healthy, happy relationships during the holiday season. And we're going to get into it deeply. But first, I want to give you just a little bit of background about myself and my practice. And then Beth is going to come on. She's going to introduce herself. And then we're going to really dive in. We're going to leave a lot of room for you to ask questions. So, throughout our presentation, there will be opportunities for you to ask us questions directly. Okay, so I've had 34 years of practice as a holistic family doctor, chiropractor. And from the very, very beginning, I was fortunate to be trained in what's called emotional clearing. And emotional clearing is a process where we go in and release from your body, from your nervous system, stored emotional trauma. So very basically, down and dirty, our bodies hold onto the memories of past emotional traumas. Those memories stay stored and stuck in the nervous system. And then things happening in our day-to-day lives that remind us of those early experiences can do what's called trigger us. And it can wake up those past old painful emotions. And now here you are in the present being triggered by an old emotional trauma. It can affect you. It can affect your relationships. It can affect almost everything in your life, including your health and well-being. And fortunately, I was trained from the very beginning on how to find where those emotional traumas are stored in the body and to release them. And once released, it gives you a tremendous opportunity for a greater sense of well-being and healing. Okay, so that's my down and dirty introduction to what I do. And now I'm going to invite Beth into the conversation from Hawaii to speak about her wonderful work and what she has to offer. Okay.
Yay!
Hey, I did it. I'm so high tech. Welcome, Beth. Please introduce yourselves to my people and your people and tell us all about your work.
Oh my gosh, Sobel, thank you so much. It's so good to see you, and I'm so glad you're doing this. I am a psychic and an astrologer. I have been able to see the dead since I was a small child. It runs in my family, but I took up astrology originally as a lark because a girlfriend was doing it, but I took to it like a duck to water because of its mathematical precision, especially around timing and the way it instructs us around, especially around when it is a good time to heal specific things. And that's part of how I met Sobel, and that's part of how our work together dovetails so nicely. And there's a lot of that going on now. We're going to be talking to you about that in specific detail. For me, as a psychic and an astrologer, my niche is more business, legal, professional, political, financial stuff. And I know our topic has to do with relationships and the holidays, but my piece of this is just to gently remind us all that our relationship issues aren't just familial or social in the holiday season. I usually encounter a lot of working professionals having extraordinary work pressure over the holiday season, and they have a really hard time assessing where to have boundaries, how to stay calm while you're having boundaries. And that doesn't help with the family stuff. And so, again, this is one of the bridges between Sobel's work and my work that has just been so glorious over the last 30-something years. And so I'm always happy to see you. I'm thrilled to be doing this, and let's rock and roll. Where do you want to start?
I think I'm going to start by getting on a plane and going to Hawaii, and then we can do this.
Join me.
There you go. Thank you, Beth, and thank you for that. And I want to let people know that we have collaborated over the last 30 years, and I have personally worked with Beth for myself, my own life, and for my patients, and it's been extraordinary. So our work is very blended. It's really, really wonderful. And anyway, today our topic is really about the holidays and about relationships during the holidays. And I wanted to start out by acknowledging for all of us that the last 2 years have been particularly painful and stressful for all of us. And I say all of us, I mean globally. And there isn't anyone that I know that hasn't been affected in some way by what has gone on in the world in the last 2 years, the pandemic and everything that's going on. And so, this intensity of what we are dealing with in our relationships is over the top right now. And one of the things that I've noticed in particular in my work, and then I'm going to have Beth share with you from her point of view, is that one of the things that's been particularly painful is that a lot of people have died and the families have not been able to be present for that death. You know, when you think about how many people died in a hospital under COVID circumstances where the family was not allowed to be there. I know some friends who were, able to be there by, by video streaming, but still, it's just not the same. And then the funeral, not to be able to attend a funeral. And I know this is a particularly painful thing for people on all those levels, but now at the holidays when you're missing that person and you didn't have the opportunity to go through a really complete process of completion as your loved one is dying. So I know that's been a factor. I also think because of COVID and all the restrictions in travel, the long separation from people that we love has been very, very hard on a lot of people. And in particular, on the emotional level, what I've seen is that, every emotion has its place. Every emotion is an okay emotion. If you really tap into it, feel it, express it. But what I have seen is that people are being so driven by fear right now. And it's not just a little fear comes up and then it gets resolved and goes away. It's becoming really chronic. People are living in a state of fear for all sorts of reasons. And the other emotion that I see that's become chronic is anger. And Beth and I could go on all day talking about just that, fear and anger. And we could go on all day just talking about the people we've worked with and the miracles we've seen. And we'll maybe one day bore you to tears with that. But for now, we want to get to really acknowledge what's going on and then get into the practical guidelines for how to help all of us get through these difficult times and how to heal our relationships. So, Beth, I'm going to pass it over to you.
Thank you. I love it that we're starting with the grief piece. And, when COVID first hit, a lot of my colleagues in the hospice arena, in the death midwifery arena, all they could talk about was the different kinds of grief people were experiencing. And it kind of took me by surprise because I was kind of in a different place at that time. It took me a while to understand what they were talking about, but there's so many different kinds of grief, grief at our loss of freedom, grief of our changing world, grief that the future we thought we had or were going to have now has to be modified. And then underneath all that, all of us have suffered some sort of loss. Every one of us at this point has lost at least one person to COVID. Our holiday gatherings are different. There's an empty seat at the table, or a couple of them, if we can go to the holiday gathering, it's a whole different experience because a lot of the souls we love are now on the other side and are not with us here in physical form. And, our tables are smaller, our celebrations are different. I did a Zoom Christmas last year with my son and daughter-in-law because they'd been exposed. Now they live 4 miles away, but we did Zoom Christmas, and we are all having to live in a deeper, more conscious way from our values because of COVID. And then we're having to find calm, rational ways to have adult conversations with this about the people that we love. And that's not easy. We're Americans. We're volatile, man. We explode. We don't do calm. We're passionate. We're very passionate people. We're this melting pot of all these passionate cultures. And we have to own our part in it. in why these conversations and this grief is difficult. And this is part of what I love so much about Sobel's work. She's a Virgo. Some of you might not know this. She's a Virgo, which makes her technically very precise, thorough, meticulous, like on it, no stone unturned. But she's got a Leo rising and a Taurus moon, which means her heart's really in it. And she understands the relational components of how this stuff works. And especially in these tender, sensitive places of grief, you know, you need a practitioner. We all need the emotional clearing, but it can be so much more powerful and comfortable of an experience if you can feel nurtured and loved in the process. And she really brings that to the table, and I've experienced it and my clients have experienced it, and I'm really grateful for that about you, Sobel. And so thanks for doing that and being that, and for all of you looking down the road at your holiday season, it's really good to do a little preemptive strike around whatever grief you may be holding over the changes over the last couple of years. You can't go wrong. It can only help.
I appreciate that, Beth. I really, really do. And, you know, you and I have worked a lot together, and what we've noticed is that the preemptive work is really powerful. You know, when you are going to visit your family and you know that, even if you haven't lost somebody, even if you're not dealing with grief, right? Yes. All of that aside, if you're going home for the family and you know there are certain dramatic moments that are bound to happen because they happen every year. You go home, the family gathers around the dinner table, you know, somebody has too much to drink, and now the conversation, you know, so all of a sudden all hell breaks loose, and now there's a lot of drama. What I've noticed is that doing some preemptive work, either you know, doing emotional clearing work, getting a reading with you, being more prepared to go into that arena when you go home, can make a huge difference. It can actually create quite a bit of change. So I used to say to my patients, please don't go home without coming and getting emotional clearing first. And we were talking about this before, how my mom used to always say, it takes two to tango. Like every relationship is a dynamic between two people, right? It's a dance. There's a dance. It's the tango. So when one person starts to do deep emotional healing work on themselves, starts to really go through change and transformation, it's like you step off the dance floor and you change the dynamic completely. And so many times people came back from their family visits and said, you wouldn't believe it, my mom was totally different this time. And I say, yeah, it might seem like mom was totally different this time, but really it was you. You were the one that was different. You stepped off the dance floor, and it allowed her to step off the dance floor. And in a way, when we have these emotionally entrenched patterns with our loved ones, and we go through this continual dance that's just not happy, when it starts to shift, it's amazing, because literally you have each other imprisoned in this pattern, and nobody wants to be there.
Nobody wants that.
No one wants to be there, right?
Nobody
So
wants
just
that.
sometimes just working on one side of the relationship is enough to transform it. And I know, Beth, with you and your work with astrology, you've been able to give people that, and I know I've really gotten a lot of value out of it, to be able to have the big picture.
The big picture.
Of what's coming, not only in your life, but what's happening in the world, and what's happening, what are the influences. And I know that coming up this holiday season, we have a couple of major astrological influences that are going to take place. And I wanted you to let people know about this. This is one of the reasons I'm so excited to have you to share this time together. So let people know what's coming and how to prepare for it a little bit.
Absolutely. Thank you. One of the things that I notice when we clear our own grief is then it enables us to be more present with the grief of others in a more constructive, facilitative way. And so while that's always an issue, there's some astrological things coming down the pike this holiday season that are going to make it more pronounced. And if you're not prepared, it may throw you off balance a little bit. Now, the first two things we have happening are a pair of eclipses. Now, eclipses always reveal. Now, what I love about eclipses is they show us things we hadn't been able to see before. Now, that's awesome. But if you step back for a minute, use the wide angle lens, there's usually a reason why we hadn't been able to see it. And it's usually some percentages. Some of it's a little bit of our own denial, and some of it's about the dynamics with other people. Now, there's a couple of different things that are often revealed during the eclipses around other people. One of them is where someone was deliberately, for one reason or another, withholding information from us. Now, that is always a painful thing to see and finally know. However, once you see it, you can deal with it and you don't have to be beholden to that anymore. You can choose, so there's that piece. The second piece has to do with something that's a little less conscious deception. It's where someone is, perhaps for lack of a better word, dishonest with you because they're dishonest with themselves. They just can't swim in any deeper waters. And there's not usually a malicious intent there. There's usually just some sort of limitation, which then you have to face and own so that you can have more realistic expectations of that person. And so, again, there's 2 eclipses coming up. They're sandwiching Thanksgiving. There's one on the 19th of November, and there's one on the 4th of December. And so, if you were, what I normally recommend to people in that kind of situation, especially if you're having family contact, is like go in before Thanksgiving, get a little clearing, raise the floor a little bit so that you're on a firmer footing. And then there's usually some debriefing, clearing that needs to happen afterwards. And so that is one of the more strategic and profound ways of combining astrology with Sobel's work, is that if you know what's coming, if you know you're likely to get a data download that may be off-putting a little bit or throw you off balance, doing some clearing before you go in will enable you to receive in a more grounded way. Does that make sense?
I love that. And
Yeah.
what I love about what you're saying is you're talking about awareness.
Consciousness. Yeah.
Consciousness and awareness.
Yeah.
And I would say that if I had to say one thing to people about what is the skill, the life skill that is going to give you the greatest chance of having profound health and well-being in this life, it's awareness. It's being aware. And when the more aware you are of what's going on within yourself, the more aware of what's going on around you, the more aware and conscious you are, the more likely you are to be able to make good and healthy choices for yourself.
Yeah.
And when let's go back to the original conversation when we started out today about how our bodies hold on to the memories of past emotional trauma, and how our life can trigger those old traumas and bring up a lot of painful old emotions from the past. I wanted to just spend a moment to give people an understanding of what it's like when you are actually being triggered by a past emotional trauma. And if I can really share that and people can become aware of that, then even though it's a painful place to be, the ability to make choices becomes much more possible and much more powerful, especially at this time of the year when we are almost guaranteed to be triggered by our family members, right? I used to go visit my mom in Florida, and there was a chiropractor right around the corner from her house. And after I'd flown, across the country, my body felt tweaked. And he also did emotional clearing work. And every time I would go see him, and we would do something called muscle testing in those days, where you held your arm in the air and they tested to see how strong your muscle was in the face of emotions. And he always found not only did he need to adjust my neck, but he needed to clear me from the emotions that were being triggered by me visiting my mom. And I got along great with my mom. This wasn't even a really troubled relationship, but we are all carrying memories of things from the past that were painful. It's locked in our nervous system. And then as we go through our day-to-day lives and we get reminded of those experiences, boom, we get triggered. And one of the most clear ways that people know they're being triggered is that something happens in their day-to-day life. Somebody says something to them, they observe something, it triggers that old memory. And now all of a sudden you're having a huge emotional reaction to something that seems really small or really insignificant. So literally someone says something and it goes into your ear, it tracks through your nervous system back to that painful old memory, let's say at age 6 or 7, where the event took place. And now let's say feelings of fear or anger or dread that were stored in your nervous system come roaring out into the present. And you now have this massive emotional reaction to something that was actually pretty small. So that's a clue. That's a clue that you're being triggered. Another clue that you're being triggered on a more subtle level is you may find yourself in unhealthy, repetitive patterns. Like, for example, let's say you want to be in a romantic relationship and you've got this history of every time I get into a romantic relationship, I seem to pick the same unhealthy person over and over again, and it ends up in pain and breakup. And each time you go to get into a new relationship, you make this conscious choice. This time it's going to be different. And yet, somehow, 6 months down the road, you think you picked a different person, and now all of a sudden you're in the same scenario. That's another way that being triggered shows
Yeah.
up. And
Yeah.
once you can be aware that you're triggered, then you can start to recognize it and you can start to make a choice. Sometimes when you're triggered, the emotions are just so powerful, there's nothing you can do but just ride it out. But sometimes if you catch it, you can think to yourself, wow, this feels like a huge reaction. I must be triggered. Let me see if I can gently step out of the conversation, because you never win when you try to communicate when you are in a triggered state.
Right.
Right? So, right.
Well, that gets back to a number of things. One of them is I truly believe that COVID and a lot of the polarization that it has created
Yes.
has really emphasized for each of us where we are able to stay calm and be the grown-up in the room and have constructive, facilitative, neutral, non-reactive conversations, and where we're not. And in those places where we're not, we have a moral and ethical obligation to heal that so we can help not only get ourselves and our family out of this mess, but our society and our world as a whole. And you can't control what the rest of the family or your workforce does, but all you can control is your own being in your own space. And one of the things I feel like I've spent a lot of time doing in the last 2 years is really re-emphasizing, okay, let's narrow our focus. Let's stay focused on what we can do. What we can do is get clearer on our way of being and why that is. Now, a deeper piece for me, for the people who are really in the deep end of the pool, is why did I choose to incarnate when knowing that something like this could happen? Clearly, I had a plan. Clearly, I had an idea. Clearly, I had a role to play in this revolution. Clearly, I have some skills and gifts and talents to bring to this. But it's only from that calm, clear place that you can access and use them. And that, again, is one of the things I love about your work, Sobel, is like you don't just get at the messy bits from this lifetime. You can track things even further back if and when necessary, to birth trauma, to trauma in the womb, to the space between the lifetimes when you and your soul tribe and the organizing forces of the universe were trying to make a plan. And then even the past lives that can also be extraordinarily triggering. And especially with immediate family members, it's like, how many times have you seen situations where it's like, oh, honey, that person's dogged you for 500 years, let's get rid of that, it's time. That's past its shelf life, let's get rid of that.
Now it's starting to become a more of a mainstream conversation to acknowledge that we are being affected by ancestral trauma. That's relatively new. I mean, you and I being able to have this conversation openly this way, we wouldn't have had this conversation
30 years ago when we met. No.
It's not something we would have publicly been speaking about. And now people are starting to understand, if I use that term ancestral trauma, people are starting to recognize, and not only recognize it, but there's scientific documentation that we are being affected by forces that are so much older than who we are and where we are in our lifetimes. And as men and as women, we carry cultural trauma, and we see it played out in our relationships with each other. I mean, I have very big vision about wanting to do more and more work with healing cultural and ancestral trauma. Like what you were just mentioning, we have to start. In fact, just a basic concept of healthy relationship starts with healthy relationship with yourself.
Right.
And for
Right.
most of us, that takes a little time to get there.
Oh, dear
That's not
Lord.
something that we're born with. So healthy relationship with oneself is a foundation. And it's something that, I mean, I'm still working on it and
It's a
still, and then from,
spiral.
right.
Yeah.
And from there, we relate to other people. And the, I think I would love to get into this whole conversation with you next about boundaries, about how we recognize, healthy boundaries around ourselves, healthy boundaries with other people. But first, I think it might be a good idea to open it up. We've been speaking for half an hour. And yeah, what, Beth and I talking for half an hour? What a shock. I just want to say, if there's anybody out there with a question that you'd like to ask at this point, we're keeping
Or
our
at any
eyes
point.
on the
Yeah.
little comment feed to see if anybody has a question about anything we've talked about yet. Because what we're about to dive into is the reality of how to, what it means to have healthy boundaries around yourself, what it means to have healthy boundaries with other people. This is one of the things that hopefully will help us become more aware and help us get through the holidays in a healthier way. I don't see
If
any questions yet.
yet, but I want to second that motion. If any of you have questions that about anything we've talked about or anything we haven't talked about yet, please feel free to submit them, because this is for you, and we want to be as helpful as possible. And so just let us know. Otherwise, we'll just keep chatting. We don't have a problem with that. Yeah.
I always say, Beth and I, you could probably, parachute us down anywhere on the planet, in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of the night, hand us a microphone, give us a topic, and say, "Go ahead and do a presentation," and we would.
For 5 or 10 years. Yeah.
Yeah, please. Even if
Yeah.
it all started with just questions, right?
Yeah.
So I want to get into talking about boundaries because,
Yeah.
okay, so we are acknowledging, number one, that the holidays can be a particularly painful time, even on a good day, in a good year, in a year where there's been no stress. We also wanted to acknowledge that the past couple of years have been immensely stressful on a planetary level. And some of you, and perhaps you know who you are, and some of you maybe don't know who you are, but some of you out there are what we call a more sensitive type. And in our culture, it's a lot of people have a lot of judgment about that. Oh, you're so sensitive. The truth is, being sensitive is actually a very powerful tool if you know how to manage it. We talk about the canary in the mine, right? The canary in the mine, for those of you that don't know that expression, in the days when mining could release this gas, I think it's hydrogen sulfide gas that could kill you. They would bring a canary in a cage into the mine because the canary was more sensitive to that poison. And the canary would die first, and then all of the people in the mine would know that they had to get out. So the canary is serving a purpose by being more sensitive. Now, fast forward to us in our day-to-day lives. Those of us who are sensitive and can pick up a lot of energy around, what's going on with people around us. These last 2 years have been excruciating because our world is in a state of increased stress and pain and grief and anger and fear. And so those of you who are sensitive, some of you may actually be feeling exhausted and aren't even sure why. That's another piece I wanted to get across. In other words, how to know you're being affected by what's going on in today's world. One is the triggers we were talking about, but I think fatigue and lack of motivation. And I've been susceptible to it myself. Beth, I don't know about you, but there have been some days
Oh,
where
yeah.
I just think,
Yeah.
I'm staying in bed today. And
Yeah.
I realized that it's not because I worked out at the gym. It's not because I didn't eat a healthy diet today. It's not anything other than the fact that there's so much intensity emotionally all around us. So if you think about our bodies are composed of literally trillions of cells. And every cell, every healthy cell has a membrane around it called the cell membrane. And that is the boundary. That is the cell's boundary. And it's critical for our health and well being. So that cell membrane is designed to allow in, only to allow in what's good and healthy and nourishing for us, which basically is food. So food gets broken down and digested into little components, your fats and carbohydrates and proteins, and they come into the cell as nourishment through a healthy boundary that knows how to determine what's good and what's not good. So the boundary of the cell keeps out things that are toxic, and it allows in the food. And when that food is metabolized and burned for energy, it creates a toxin or a garbage, and then the cell
Has to
wall
go.
allows it out. So if you take that idea and you expand it to look at yourself, do you have a healthy boundary around you that allows in what's nourishing and what's healthy and what's good and what feeds you and keeps out and rejects what isn't? Or once you discover something that's in you that's not good for you, there are ways to let it out. Some people might go on a detoxification program. Some people might do emotional clearing. Some people might go to psychotherapy or consult with someone like Beth to discover what is not working, what do I need to release and let go of. So that opens up the conversation around boundaries. And I would love to hear more of what you have to say about boundaries.
Oh, Sobel, this is so powerful and so important. And, I know we've talked about this a lot of times for people when you first start to get that awareness, like a lot of us are probably going to get around Thanksgiving. It usually requires a bit of an integrated strategy where you're doing a little bit of both. Or a little bit of a lot of things. You may be changing up your nutritional and exercise. You're definitely going to be doing some emotional clearing. You want to understand a couple of things from a psychological standpoint. What happens a lot with bad boundaries in psychology is that we have what's often called a habituated struggle. In Buddhism, it's habituated struggle. In psychology, it's a repetition compulsion. And
Yes.
based in attachment theory, where we, as human souls, it's really scary to be here on the planet and to have split off from God. And so we have to feel attached somehow, somewhere to other human souls. The tricky part is, those attachments are based in love, but in real time on any given day, they're not always that nourishing.
Right.
And so being able to clear the neediness with someone like Sobel, to understand and clear the need, the deep need, so that then you can understand more about how to get those needs fulfilled in a healthier way. And some of that has to do with communication skills and articulation. That's another thing that Sobel's work is really powerful for. I can send people to learn communication and mediation and negotiation strategies. But if they're triggered, they're deer in the headlights, or they're angry, or they're sad and small, and they can't use the tools they know. And so again, I kind of excel at creating the integrated strategy so that we figure out what you need to heal, what you need to learn, where you need the support, so that you can be in what in business circles is called a peak performer. You can be like an athlete, like an Olympian, where you are operating at peak strength, peak force more of the time. Now, humans being humans, we can't do this all day, every day, but
Right.
the more you chip away at this over time, using those spiral dynamics and those seasonal opportunities, those astrological opportunities, the easier it is to keep momentum and to stay motivated and encouraged. That's one of the things that's been so hard for a lot of us since COVID, is it's been hard to stay motivated and encouraged. It's a lot now. We have more waves of emotion, and it's not just more frequency. It feels more intense. It is more intense. It feels like a tsunami a lot. And so, like, managing that process, knowing when to stay in bed or to take a day off, or to practice some more different self-care, so then you can create the clarity to create the strategy. What do I really need the most right now? What's the next right action? In another facet of business is what they call the sniper mind, doing less, but doing the most precise thing and only doing that thing, and cutting out a lot of the extraneous weirdness that we kind of get addicted to.
Exactly. Oh, I
Yeah,
love
yeah,
that. That's
yeah,
a really
yeah,
interesting expression.
Yeah, the sniper mind. It's you know, if you don't come from a gun culture, it's not going to make as much sense. But for a Southerner originally like me and from a military culture, there's a big difference between a sawed-off with buckshot and a sniper, and that's the metaphor.
Right. And my water pistols don't count, I guess.
The Nerf squirt gun. Yeah.
My squirt gun doesn't count. Yeah, I love that. It's really, what I love about it is that it speaks of making a choice.
Conscious choice.
Conscious choice. And when you have a lot of stored emotional trauma and that trauma gets triggered, it's very hard to make conscious choice.
You're
the more
not.
you work on yourself, the more you clear out the trauma, the less reactive you are, then the more aware you can be of when a situation is right for you and when it's not right for you. And I think one of the beautiful things about drawing boundaries is that you can get to the point where you can even love someone and care about them tremendously and still draw a boundary with them. You don't have to, it doesn't have to be a big upset. It's like,
No.
It doesn't have to be, I hate you, you're toxic for me, I'm drawing a boundary. It can be, I know who I am. I know what feels right for me, meaning you have your own healthy boundary. And I recognize that that relationship isn't healthy for me. And so within whatever choice you have, like it may be something at work that you can't get away from, but you might be able to do certain things that will protect you, and you may not be able to leave the job, but you can start to protect yourself. And I think that one of the things that I love to teach people is that once you become aware of what is good for you and what is not good for you, and you want to draw that boundary, is to recognize in another human being that you're in relationship with on whatever level, whether or not that person has the capacity or the desire or the interest to communicate with you and do deep healing work with you at the level that you might want. Like, it's okay to recognize that, hey, this is where I'm at. I want things to be better with this person, but this person has no interest, doesn't seem to
ability.
The capacity. Right.
That gets back to the thing that I was talking about earlier. And I think it's been simultaneously one of the hardest and yet most liberating things about this whole COVID dynamic is that as we've had to isolate and make choices about contact with people, what it has revealed to us is not only our own capacities and where we need to shore things up, but the capacities of others, especially the ones that we love. And one of the hardest things I'm seeing in people, and certainly in myself and my own family, is having to be more in reality about who people are and where they are and what they're bringing to the table, what they're capable of being and doing, and then being able to accept, again, not from a place of my neediness or my judgment on them. It's like, this is reality, and it's my responsibility to be in reality and to figure out how to love this person exactly how and where they are in the best possible way. That's not an epic drain on me, and then to be able to find what I call your talking points. What are your talking points? How are you languaging this to this person? And then how do you then take responsibility for whatever that need is and finding a better way? Don't keep the repetition compulsion. Our tendency is to confuse love with drama and to just keep throwing ourselves at the wall and then being pissed at them because I'm not in reality, and it's like, okay, how do I reel it in, and how do I take responsibility for getting my own needs met in a healthier way? And I think one of the hardest things I'm seeing with people in the last 2 years is it throws you back on your faith. What do you believe about God or whoever the organizing forces of the universe are? What do you believe about your own self as a soul? Why are you here? What are you supposed to be doing with the days and the hours and all these people I think I love, or that I struggle to love, or that struggle to love me? and where do I leave off and the other person begins. And one of the blessings I think of COVID again is it's really forced us to be more conscious. Now, consciousness is not easy. It's painful at times. And so how do we just allow ourselves to say, I'm growing, you're growing, we're growing. It's a messy process. And how do I use process thought? How do we just say in real time, thank you for that. And I need a day to think about it, or whatever that is, to give yourself permission to take some space in a gracious way, in a grateful way, and process, and then figure out your talking points and then go back to the conversation.
Exactly.
That's part of the boundary is not, when we first used to talk about boundaries 30 years ago, it was about cutting people out of your life. And now we've evolved. It's different. It's better. It's more sophisticated. It acknowledges that love existed before this lifetime and it will exist after. And we need to make conscious choices. So we're moving our karma forward. We're not creating more nasty shit to clean up. Yeah. Oops. Oops. Auntie Beth works a little blue sometimes.
Put a quarter in the jar.
Yeah, but ideally you want to be moving the karmic ball down the field in the right direction. You can't always clean up everything to the degree that you'd like to, but the goal is to not make it worse.
Right. And I love what you said about, and this took me years, and this is something, in my own spiritual path that I work on every year, which is, where do I catch myself in judgment? And where, right? And I learned a wonderful distinction between judgment and discernment. Right? Like if I judge someone, I go, oh, that person's la-di-da, right? First of all, if I found that judgment of another person, I might as well look inside myself, because something in me, there's something in me that's reacting that needs to be addressed if I'm judging another human
angry
being.
or grieving.
So that's a great hint for people. If you're reacting in judgment to other people and you have a harsh judgment of other people, take a look inside and see what where that might be coming from for you. But the other thing is, and there's times when you have to make a judgment. Hey, I judge it's not safe to cross the street right now. I judge that person has a gun pointed at my head. But discernment is about making like what do you call it? The sniper mentality. It's
sniper
like a choice. It's like I am discerning that this relative of mine, as much as they love me, they don't get this part of my life. And so I don't have to force it on them. I don't have to say the only way you can love me is to accept this part of me. No, it's not, like I come from a family where I'm the natural medicine healer, the one that moved to California. I mean, there's all sorts of,
I'm the groovy hippie.
All sorts of that. But I'm loved. And I can recognize where some people, like some of the younger people in my family, have a deeper getting of who I am than some of the older people in my family, just because of how we were raised and what we were taught. So it's all fine. But what I recognize is this is my family and I love them. These are friends and I love them. And what COVID has taught me is that there's nobody in my life, of all the people that I know, all the hundreds and thousands of people that I know and love, there's not one of them where I agree with them on absolutely
100%.
Right. Yeah. So my feeling is, if we're going to get through with our own health, being attacked, our relationships intact, and then relationship from 1 to 2 to family to community to business to country to global, if we're going to get through, we are going to have to find the places where we agree. We're going to have to find that and rest more and more in trying to discover with each human being, what do we have in common? Where can we meet? Where can we agree with each other? And from that place, maybe we can work out the other issues that seem impossible. They seem contentious, but I think the more you can see how connected you are to another human being, the better chance you have of being able to stay in that relationship and solve problems together and come to conclusions that are good for everybody.
Well, yeah, and that's huge. And that's one of the things that was, in hindsight, it shouldn't have been a surprise to me, but it really has been in the last 2 years in terms of working with I used to work primarily with individuals or with businesses. And in the last year and a half, 2 years, there's been a lot more extended family work around that very dynamic.
Yes.
How do we own when our anger or our judgment or our whatever stuck emotion or our own PTSD is the problem in having calm, rational adult conversations to solve the problem? And usually it's been around extended families and elders. What are we going to do? Mom's developed Alzheimer's, but it's scary to put her in assisted living now or in a memory unit, because if she gets COVID, we might not be able to visit her. She might die alone. How do we negotiate this as a family? Do we have documents? Is there a will or a trust? Who's the executor? Who's got medical power of attorney? What are mom's wishes? Like, these are extraordinarily charged conversations to have, and they don't have to be. They don't have to be. And that's a place where we have to be really honest with ourselves. And this is where these eclipses come in, where it's like we have to be really honest with ourselves. When am I the problem? And then when it's my brother or my mother or whoever, how do I stay calm and untriggered? How do I get the help I need so I can be the grown-up in the room and say, brother, I love you, and I can see that this has got a bit of a charge for you, but this is not only a love issue, a family issue, but it's an economic issue. If we don't handle this properly, this can tank the whole family financially. And let's not do that. How do we be safe and smart? How do we be truly conservative with our relationship and our familial resources, the intergenerational familial resources, and how do we stay calm and clear? And again, back to this confusion around drama. We confuse drama with communication. We confuse drama with love. We confuse drama with caring. We confuse drama with problem solving. And so how do we each take responsibility for our own behaviors so that we can be constructive and facilitative, especially back to the astrology piece? Like I've said, there's been this huge emphasis, like I've never seen before, on extended family planning and management. But Venus, the planet that rules relationships and love, is going retrograde on December 19th. Oh, how convenient. Thankfully, it's after Hanukkah, but it's before Christmas, Kwanzaa, the new year, and often tax decisions have to be made by the new year. And so, and it's in Capricorn, which rules the elders, tradition, finances, banking, investments, stuff like that. So trust that there will be a lot revealed about family finances, family health, and the state of play in the extended family. And there will be huge opportunities to come together and heal and move the ball down the field, not just for you, but for your tribe, your clan, your family, your people, which is what it's all about. And, and that's what we stand for. That's what Sobel and I have been doing for 30 years. That's what we stand
for. And we're getting to the end of the hour. And I'm laughing because I had no idea that a Facebook Live would suck the charge out of my computer. So we're reaching the end of the hour and the end of my computer. Beth, I can't thank you enough for being here. I love talking with you any day of the week. I wish I was there in Hawaii. We could go hit the beach and go for a swim. Thank you so much for your wisdom, your expertise.
Thank you. I'm so honored.
And we can do this again. I'm really happy about this. And so here we come. It's holiday season. If anybody would like to reach Beth, Beth is available at her website, which is
www.bethmcdonaldconsulting.com.
BethMcDonaldConsulting.com. My website is emotionalclearinghouse.com. And because of the holidays and because of all these relationship issues that are up right now, bigger than ever. I'm offering my Healthy, Happy Relationship Emotional Clearing Program during the week before Thanksgiving. And you can find that on my website. It'll be
Yeah.
Monday, Wednesday, Friday, November 15th, 17th, and 19th. We'll have it at
Yeah.
2 times, one at noon Pacific Standard Time and one at 5 Pacific Standard Time. I'd love to see you there. And also, if any of you want to know more about emotional clearing, I do have a free masterclass video that I can send you. I think there's a link that Ashley will, there it is. There's the
There
link.
it is.
Beautiful, to the Emotional Clearinghouse, and we'll be more than happy to send that to you. So I'm so glad that we got to do this today, Beth. Thank you so much. I
Thank
hope for
you.
everybody out there that this was helpful, that this gives you a sense of, how possible it is to go into the holiday season with more awareness, more of a sense of discernment and love and lack of judgment, and this sense of creating a healthy boundary around yourself and with other people. Beth, any final words before the end of the hour and my 4% computer goes to 0?
For me, it's all about moving forward with peace and confidence.
Yes. Yes. Beautiful.
Yeah.
All right, everyone. Thank you so much. And thank you,
Thank
Ashley,
you.
for tech support, and much love to all of you, and happy holidays.
Happy holidays.